My money is on Ted Braden. If you could invent a DB Cooper suspect, you'd invent Ted Braden. Check it out. Braden was a paratrooper in World War II, jumped on D-Day with the 101st at age 16. Korea and Vietnam. He won multiple international skydiving competitions while a member of the Army. 911 logged jumps with the military and was a pioneer of halo jumping, was recruited to be a team leader in the MACV SOGs. This was the predecessor to Delta Force and was a multi-service covered military special force run by the CIA. Led squads on covert jumps into Laos, Cambodia, and northern Vietnam from 64 to 67. Did many of these jumps into enemy territory off the aft stairs of. That's right. Boeing 727s. At the time of the skyjacking, the only people who knew this could be done were those involved in these MACV SOG missions and some employees at Boeing. Was always bitching about how he and his fellow soldiers weren't paid enough. Was always coming up with schemes to make/extort/steal money while in the service. In 1967, he heard about how people were looking for mercenaries to fight in the Congolese Civil War and how well they would be paying. So he went AWOL from Vietnam and made his way to the Congo. The CIA went after him and eventually found and arrested him in the Congo. Was imprisoned at Fort Dix for a very brief time and mysteriously was never convicted of anything, nor tried, and was merely given an honorable discharge and told that he couldn't re-enlist in the military. Once released, he tried to go overseas to be a mercenary again and found out that his name had been blacklisted by the CIA, and so he wasn't allowed to leave the country to be a mercenary. Not knowing how to make a living other than by being a soldier, he resorted to being a truck driver. His trucking company was stationed out of Vancouver. Interesting. When the Cooper hijacking happened, several members of the military contacted the FBI and essentially said this can only be Ted Braden. Braden had no family, so there wasn't anyone around to, in retrospect, said, "Hey, Dad wasn't around during Thanksgiving 1971. His alibi was that he was driving his truck on the plane." Cooper was by everyone who remembered him as being middle-aged or mid-40s. Braden was 44. Cooper was described as being 5 feet 8 to 5 feet 10 and slight. Braden was 5 feet 9 and 150 pounds. Cooper was described as being somewhat olive-skinned and swarthy. Braden's mother's side were Sicilian. Cooper was extremely calm the entire time. The only time he showed any emotion was when he was arguing with the pilots because he wanted to take off from Seattle with the stairs down. They didn't think it could be done. Cooper told them it absolutely could be done and he demanded it be done. The pilots simply refused to do so, thinking it would cause the plane to crash. And Cooper eventually relented. Braden was described by many of his military colleagues and commanding officers as one of the calmest people under fire you could imagine. Cooper smoked Raleigh cigarettes and so did Braden. Cooper was described by both flight attendants who spoke with him as having either a Midwestern accent or no accent. Braden was from Ohio. Cooper chose the military parachute over the more modern sport parachute. When asked by the flight attendant why he was doing this, he replied, "I don't have a grudge against your airline, miss. I just have a grudge." Braden certainly had a grudge against the government for blacklisting him from the only work for which he was skilled at, being a soldier. The alias Dan Cooper. Dan Cooper was the name of a popular 50s and 60s French-language comic book series. The hero, Dan Cooper, skydived into areas to fight the bad guys. What is a country whose official language is French? The Congo. If Braden was Cooper, then it's extremely plausible that he was exposed to this comic series while serving in the Congo. Following the hijacking, recent investigation shows that in 1972, despite being a truck driver, he bought his mother a new car as well as a new car for himself, and that he was living in a freaking penthouse in Manhattan. Was arrested in the mid-70s for a major racketeering job in the trucking industry. But like his mysterious release from going AWOL, He was once again given a slap on the wrist and the charges were dropped. His personality. He was always a loner and never had close friends in his life. Men he served with would later say that when they would go to the bars, Braden would sit at the end of the bar by himself, just seeming to sulk. A Green Beret who served with him stated Braden is among those professionals who appear to have a secret death wish coupled with well-trained instincts for survival. He continually placed himself in unnecessary danger but always managed to get away with it. Another Special Forces member stated he was the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality. Military tests that he took for entrance into the MACV SOGs indicated that he likely possessed a genius-level IQ. Couple things to consider. Jumping out of a freaking jumbo jet is no small potatoes. Many of the famous Cooper suspects had been static line paratroopers in World War II or even had no known skydiving experience at all. You'd need to have mega balls to jump out of a jet and also have the skill set to do it. Perhaps most critically, you'd need to know that it could even be freaking done in the first place. There were several Cooper copycats who successfully pulled off similar skyjackings of 727s in the months after Cooper. But to be the guy who first did it, that takes someone special. The suitcase bomb. While this is a common trope you see in movies these days, it wasn't so in 1971. The whole concept of a suitcase bomb required some ingenuity. His calmness is especially noteworthy when you consider that the subsequent copycats were nervous wrecks during their skyjackings. Despite being badasses in their own right, Richard McCoy won a Distinguished Flying Cross and a Silver Star in Vietnam as a chopper pilot. He literally flew hundreds of sorties as a chopper pilot. Yet during his skyjacking he was noted, even before he started the skyjacking, for being fidgety and sweating and breathing heavy. Rob Hetty also successfully pulled off a 727 skyjacking. He was a 21-year-old Vietnam paratrooper who served 2 tours in the thickest fighting in Vietnam, and yet he later described himself as being barely able to breathe during his skyjacking. Cooper, on the other hand, sat calmly for 5 hours, smoking cigarettes and drinking his bourbon and coke. With one hand on the detonator, the flight attendant lit his cigarettes for him. It's also worth noting that none of the copycats gave any specific instructions to the pilots on how to fly the 727. They just jumped out with the jet going full speed and it nearly killed 2 of them. What Cooper told the pilots wasn't public knowledge at the time. Cooper told them to fly at 180 knots. Wheels down. With flaps at 15 degrees. And at 10,000 feet. That's mighty specific and strongly indicates that Cooper had knowledge of how best to safely parachute out of a 727. Cooper was also the only one to not be caught. Getting caught on his missions with Spec Ops meant certain death. This is a man who knew how to escape situations and blend into his environment. Occam's razor would point toward Ted Braden being D.B. Cooper. One of the military's most experienced skydivers is kicked out of the service and isn't allowed to pursue a lucrative career as a mercenary, so he uses the skills that the military taught him to ransom $200,000 from the government.